Hi guys, I'm Pete Moorbacher, and I have been using the same brush for like the last 20 years. I think it's the most perfect digital paintbrush that's ever been made, but recently I think I improved on it. And the title's not clickbait. I did make over $1 million in art over the course of me using this thing. It has been the rock that I built my church on. It's the foundation of my whole career. And I want to tell you about the improvements that I've made. But first, I want to give you a little history about how I got to this point. When I was first learning Photoshop, the brush settings tab had actually 2 checkboxes in it. So you open up Photoshop and this is the brush tool. It's a round brush. And if you were to turn on the opacity control, you would be able to control the opacity of the stroke using your pen pressure. And it would behave a little bit like mechanical pencil, right? Where you can push light and you can get some nice like gray marks, and then you push harder and you get some darker black marks. Even today, I see that the majority of people who are painting with digital brushes are using opacity flow. And that's fine for them, but I don't like it. I went the direction of going size flow. And this is what the size flow looks like. Light pressure gives you a thin mark, and then pushing down harder gives you a thicker mark. And the reason why I like it is because it feels like a paintbrush. You know, you press lightly and you get just the tip of the bristles, and then you push down harder and you get the body of the brush. But if you ever wanted to blend with it, you'd need to turn the opacity down. And so you can see that when we turn the opacity down, we can kind of smush these colors around, but we get this really ugly stair-stepping. And so when people are trying to figure out how to blend in Photoshop for the first time, one of the first things that they reach for is turning down the hardness. So they can try to blend by kind of making the brush softer and softer, but like it creates this kind of blurry, ugly mark that's just not very desirable. And I think it gets people very frustrated. I don't think turning down the hardness is the solution to this problem. The real solution to this problem is to turn the flow down. And so we're going to turn the flow way down here, and we're going to see what happens with our mark. We end up with this weird kind of thing where it's not coming out all the way in this thick blob anymore. Instead, it's kind of slowly flowing out, kind of like an airbrush. If we don't have it turned down quite so low, we start to get this interesting effect where you can see as I do like a thin to a thick mark here, go light to pushing hard, you can see that we get these nice firm edges on our stroke up and down when we go long ways. But then as we scrub, we start to get these softer edges. Now you can start to see what direction the brush is moving as it's moving. And you can see up and down strokes are actually different from side to side strokes. This is allowing the artist hand to show through in the brush, but it's got one problem to it. And that is these weird concentric circles. You can go and kind of just blend them out by putting a little bit of work into it, but we could also just turn down the spacing. I'm going to turn on the spacing to 10%, and I'm going to set the opacity to 80%. I'm going to set the flow down to 10%. This is going to give me the brush that I use for just about everything. This is Old Huckleberry. It is the paintbrush that I've built my entire career off of. This is it. Over the years, I did want a few more options. And so one of the things I ended up playing around with was a sort of modified version of a default Photoshop sponge brush that looks like this. And it does a lot of the same things. You can see that as I am going laterally along an edge, it carves a nice sharp edge, and then it kind of like, gets looser, less dense as it goes towards the edge of these like scrubbier marks. And I don't know why it took me so long, but I realized that like this is ultimately the thing that I'm looking for out of all my brushes. And it doesn't need to be the sponge brush, and it doesn't need to be the round brush. It can be all kinds of things. Like I made a round brush with some texture to it. It does the same thing. And then I made a version of the sponge brush that instead of being square was triangular. And I even tuned it a little bit to just make it feel that much better so that you get the triangle is going to follow the original direction of your stroke. So if you're making a stroke like this, you can see that the terminals end in these points here. And then if you do it the other way, it actually goes the other way too. So I've tuned a bunch of little things about a lot of these brushes to make them feel good. I've got an oval version of this. All the brush tips I've made myself custom in Photoshop, just like pounding them out with the round brush to like make my own custom tip shapes. And then my experiments led me to this thing, which I really like, where it makes this, it's this long flat brush where the edges are very like soft and kind of degraded. So we get like this like broken bristle look at the edges, but we get these nice like flat sides. So you can see that going back and forth. You can really see that exaggeration of up and down is way different from side to side. Isn't that cool? I then wanted to make one that was like a little bit more like a distressed paint. And so this is the gritty one. And it is a little bit thicker and doesn't flow quite as much as a lot of the other options. But when you start, it has a lot of the same size flow to it. And when you start layering it together, you can get this kind of like distressed painty look that I think is very desirable, very aesthetic. This is actually, you would think that this was a painting brush because it's got this like paint splatter tip to it. But I actually use this one primarily for drawing. The reason why I like this brush is because it allows me to do digital drawing where I'm not being too precious about things. I like to oversize the brush quite a bit and try to draw with very, very little pen pressure. So I'm able to make a few little light marks like this that are all a little odd shaped. And then when I want to fill in darker bits, I push down and I get this like big grody mark. And they come in at a very different texture from each other, but it's all just one brush that is controlled entirely through the size flow, just like all of my other ones. It's about using the size of the brush to your advantage. Next one I've got on the list here is a flat brush that is, I think, probably the most different from the bunch because the size is actually clamped a little bit and it does have a little bit of opacity flow. I think that when people do rendering with flat brush, it can look really, really nice. It can be good for making kind of concentric strokes like this, where you want to see each individual paint stroke. And then you can see it's got a little bit of a faux bristle pattern going through the middle of it. And then I've got a crustier version of it where it's got a little bit of a breakup to it. And that breakup kind of follows it all the way to the edge of the stroke. And it also has a little bit of value variation running through the middle. So even when we sample pure white here, you can start to see there's some variation through there. So it's a kind of dirty, broken version of the flat brush. The last like major one that I made is this cloud brush. It's not really used for clouds. It's more of for smoke effects and sort of special effects and texture. It's nice to have a little bit of size flow in here because when you're trying to make like a broken up edge of something that's like cloudy or misty, you can push lightly to get these smaller little wisps and then push in harder to fill in larger area to create this like variation across the whole body of the smoky effect. And so this is just a nice little special effect brush that I use every once in a while for the occasional smoke effect that I need to make. And I like to do this with the opacity turned all the way up because you really want to benefit from the smoky texture of the brush tip there. The last two are ultra basic brushes. This one is just a size flow brush, but with the hardness turned all the way down. Because every once in a while, you just need a really, really soft mark. You just need it. And so putting it on the palette, having it be controlled with size flow like everything else to me felt like the right choice. And then the last one is the opposite. It's a hard brush. It's at 100% opacity, 100% flow. And if you just need to carve a hard mark, you don't want to mess with opacity, but you want to have that control of the size flow, it's there for you. And so that's a total of 13 brushes. For me, this is more than I ever needed to build my whole art career. I think if you're a beginner, this is a perfect brush pack to start with because these are simple. They are tools. They're not gimmicks. This is a set of tools designed to allow you to just think and let things happen on the canvas. It's how it's always worked for me, and I hope that you enjoy it too. It runs a little counter to the average way in which brushes are made, but I think I'm onto something. Give it a try. If you like it, feel free to donate. I'm not depending on the donations. I'm really just wanted to make this thing for free forever. And if you like it, I would love to make more of these because I want to continue to expand on this philosophy of mark making with different textures, different tips, find different ways of working within this type of brush feel and expand the category. So this is going to be theoretically Size Flow Gang Collection 1. And let me know if you like it. Share it with people if you love it. Make sure to tell them to just put in $0 in the Gumroad. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around.